Indian families. When Bill Frank was born in 1879, his family lived on their allotment of 205 acres.
Now, Dad, when you was living back over here on your property across the river, was there a lot more fish, Dad, at that time than there is today?
Oh, yes. The river was just full of fish. All these creeks were full of fish. Yellow Creek, Muck Creek. Yeah. Several other creeks on up to toward the La Grande.
During World War I, the Army condemned the reservation land on the east side of the river for Fort Lewis. All the families on that side of the river were removed from their homes, and the government decided what compensation they were going to receive. Bill Franks received 6 acres, several miles downstream from the reservation, and it is still held for him in federal trust like allotted reservation land. This is the place still known today as Frank's Landing. Bill Frank lives here. His wife, Angeline, lives with him.
Make your wish. Blow the candle out.
His son, Bill Jr., lives here too, with his wife, Norma, their 2 children, Sugar
Ice cream you want.
and Maureen. Bill Frank Jr. and his family live in this house. And in this house lives Maiselle, Grandpa's daughter, with her husband, Al Bridges. Al and Maiselle have 3 daughters, the youngest, Alison, and Valerie. Their oldest daughter, Suzette, lives here with her husband, Sid Mills, and the baby, Poughton. And then there's Herman Johns, better known as Curley, another of Bill Frank's grandchildren. This is the family that lives at Frank's Landing. During the summer, they work at various jobs, frequently in neighboring berry fields and tree farms. But when autumn comes and the salmon start running, Bill Frank's family, like all their ancestors, set their nets for fish. They smoke some for themselves and they sell some, even as their ancestors did when they traded dried salmon for articles from the interior. Now, one thing is different than it used to be. Now, when they set their nets in the evening, the game wardens sit and watch from the other side of the river.
No jurisdiction on this property. There's no court to tell that you have jurisdiction on this property.
We were arrested. This is illegal. We're going to have to see that this time.
What is it?
Hey, Sydney, you're under arrest.
My father and Sid were arrested off the landing here. So the following day, to let them know that we weren't going to quit fishing, Alison and I, my younger sister, set a net up there at the trestle, about a mile and a half from here, upriver.
In 1854, Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens made treaties with all the Indians in Washington. The Indians gave up all claims to the land in the territory except for special areas reserved to them. In return, they were to receive payments and were promised that they and their descendants would always have the right to fish in their usual and accustomed grounds. Valerie Bridges grew up learning how to fish here on the Nisqually, where her grandfather fished.
Valerie, you heard when your grandfather told of a white man who came with promises of gold, saying, sell us the land that lies under the sun. We'll live free as long as the rivers run, as long as the rivers run.
We set the net and waited for the state. We're just going to let them know that we're not going to quit fishing. We have this fishing right. It's a treaty, supreme law of the land under their constitution, and we're not going to give up our fishing rights. There are treaties throughout the United States being broken. That's really what it is, a treaty we're fighting for. Treaties throughout the United States. We resisted when they did try to take our net because it is our property, and not only protecting our property, but ourselves, because we too have been clubbed, night raids, tear gassed, and we're getting sick and tired of it.
He promised us gold, he promised us grain, he promised us houses safe from the rain. He said that his words could not be undone, but would last for as long as the rivers run, as long as the rivers run.
A lot of people have asked, how long I've been involved in this, or my family. And I go back to when my little girl was 2.5 years old, my youngest girl, and she'll be 19 next month. When she was 2.5 years old was the very first time that her dad was arrested and did 30 days in jail. This was her first experience in going into a judge's courtroom, if you can call it JP courtroom.
Maiselle Bridges, Bill Frank's daughter, Valerie, and Alison, and Suzette's mother.
And they did this in the space of 2-3 hours. Like, they took him in, they sentenced him and put him right into jail. So my girls, all 3 of them, have been involved in this fishing struggle practically all their lives.
Leshai said no, he was caught, he was hung. The treaty was made, nothing else could be done. We said, we'll keep our promises if you keep just one. Let us fish for as long as the rivers run, as long as the rivers run.
The U.S. Supreme Court confirms that the treaty is still valid, but they say the state also has the right to impose conservation regulations. The Washington Fisheries and Game Departments say that to conserve the fish, the mouth of the rivers must remain closed to net fishing. But the river mouths always were the fishing grounds of the Indians. And once again, Al Bridges has to hawk a motor to bail a daughter out of jail.
Valerie, you knew all this history well, but you saw your father being taken to jail, and you vowed you would fight for your people till we'd won what was ours for as long as the rivers run, as long as the rivers run.
Well, I think the state is using the term conservation as a weapon against the Indian to stop us altogether from fishing. You know, when you speak of conservation, if they're going to conserve, they should start conserving out in the outer waters, particularly in the Puget Sound. After the fish leave the Straits of Juan de Fuca, you can go out here in the Puget Sound when they're fishing out there and find numerous commercial boats. And their take, one purseine boat out there in the Sound can take probably, more fish in one day than our whole group here can take in one season. There's various ways that the Indian has always practiced conservation. This was done almost automatically. Not only did they allow an escapement, but elements of nature provide for escapement, or used to. But from when the treaty was first signed in 1854, when we ceded the land, didn't mean that we gave up our hunting and fishing rights. We think that we should be able to fish this way, and fish and hunt this way, and live this way, live off the resources, the natural resources. This is probably what you'd call the Indian's last stand. Otherwise, you're just there'll no longer be what's known as an Indian or an Indian way of life. I know some boys around here, in fact, that if they were to be taken to a city, they'd want to come back to this kind of living. One in particular already has a trade as a welder, but he said, if I have to live in the city in order to make a living of that sort, then I'll go back out in the country and hoe berries or do something. It just is so I can get back to my way of my way that I want to live, and this is the Indian way. We used to think that we'd find justice in the courts. This was before we'd be arrested, and we'd be taken to jail, and we'd serve our time. Then we'd come back out, and then we'd hide around and fish. We found out that we weren't getting justice in the courts, so in order to find some sort of a solution for this, we figured that if we got the public interested enough to where they'd see what's going on in the courts, that we would get some sort of justice.
And then in 1964, we just said, well, we're not moving no more. And one of the first things we did was to organize a Indian organization. And this is what we did. We called ourselves the Survival American Indian Association. And our main goal and purpose of this organization was to fight for treaty rights. And from that time on, the fight has been building up, and gradually it's really, you know, taken up our full time.
In 1968, the Survival Organization enlisted the support of sympathetic young people to help keep a 24-hour guard on the nets of the Indian fishermen, because if the nets and boats were unguarded, they would be stolen by fishermen or destroyed by sportsmen.
If you want something and if it's yours, you've got to fight to keep, and our people just aren't grasping this idea. They think that one of these days the government's going to feel sorry for them and give them what they want. This isn't so. So we have these young kids today. Right now they see what's happening to the Indians, so they come forward to offer their help, and we've accepted their help.
Fishermen and sheriff deputies came at night, making arrests and seizing nets, but the young people held on. As fall turned into winter, they built temporary shelters and lived in them. Buffy St. Marie visited the encampment. dramatise the fishing rights, the Frank Landing encampment moved into Olympia and set a net at the mouth of the dam where there is a fish ladder. The fishery officers and police responded, giving the public a chance to see the kind of action that usually takes place under the cover of night on the Nisqually River. Come gather round me and I'll sing you a song. I'll tell you a story of people that were strong. We live with nature in harmony, obeying the laws that were taught to me. Greeting each stranger with an open hand, sheltered and fed him and called him friend. Once I was wild as the eagle in the sky, free to love and to live and to die. I roamed this land from the mountains to the sea, brother to the elk, the bear and the deer. Up the river, the lakes, and the redwood tree. This was my land as far as I could see. I had no jails nor prison farm, no barbed wire to do me harm. I paid no one to rule over me. No one owned the shade of the tree. I swam the
Now we have another beautiful young red sister, Suzette Bridges. Yeah! You know, when we go out and talk to all these citizens of America, we tell them, you better do something about your government, because your government is awfully sick, and it's trying to make our people sick. And I keep trying to explain to these people, we're never, never, never going to be like them. And I don't know what's wrong with Dan Evans, and I don't know what's wrong with Don Carlson. Why is it that they keep practicing genocide on my people? And I keep telling him that he better get his ass in gear.
Of the people who came to help in '68, only one stayed. Sid Mills, a Yakima Indian station at Fort Lewis, announced he would not go back to the Army. Instead, he remained at Frank's Landing and married Suzette. A year later, dozens of cases were still in court. The survival of American Indian Association was broke. So once again, the family at Frank's Landing was alone on the Nisqually River. The day came that Al, Sid, Valerie, and Alison were all in jail. Suzette had just had a baby, Poughton. So Maiselle Bridges and Norma Frank were left to fish by themselves.
Illegal gear, and it's going to be taken.
You have to take us with it, because we're not letting you go fishing under the Medicine Creek Treaty, and we're both all members. We are too.
You're poaching is what you're doing.
We're not either. You're the one that's poaching. You're the ones that's been poaching on our land.
Hook that in.
taking this net. This is the last net you got.
Both under arrest for fishing and cold water.
And then something happened that was felt around the world. A group of Indians captured and held Alcatraz Island and claimed it in the name of all tribes. Indians from all over came together to experience unity and strength. The girls and Sid went down with Powhatan as soon as they learned about it. Elle and Maiselle and Curley came a little later with a carload of food and clothes sent by the Washington Indians.
Now you know who's going to cross them. I'm going to close it where it's cute.
For the United States. What did they hold?
They held that the state regulate where they allow the first aid boats and the uniters to come right in within 4 miles of our area.
When they got to the docks, they were greeted by an old friend, John Vigil, who had fished with them at Frank's Landing the winter before. He was one of the first to occupy Alcatraz and agreed to take them on a tour.
Up there in the warden town. Indian flag flying high.
Artichokes, huh?
Oh, artichokes?
Yeah.
Looks like a poppy.
Feel like nobody's going to be climbing up that hill.
How pretty it is.
Try to overrun this island.
Alcatraz had been one of the things that the Indians had known was possible for them to do. Those that knew of the laws created by the federal government in the nature of the treaties, they knew they had exclusive reversionary title to the place. There was an approach by the older conservatives, but the youth became immediately dissatisfied. And 14 of us hired a fishing boat, found a fishing boat captain who wasn't afraid to take us to the island. We all paid him $3 each, and he took us on across, man. And we went there, not really knowing fully what to expect, but we knew that we were within our rights.
Well, they had a Thanksgiving dinner here, you know, except they invited everyone except Puritans. There's 2 ducks here and a turkey and 5 stuff.
Oh!
This here is Machine Gun Kelly cell. Machine Gun Kelly cell right here.
No different from anybody else?
No.
Compromise had been the full demise of the Indians. This became fixed in our minds that as long as we were there as representatives of our people, that we couldn't compromise their rights in any way. And this gave our total commitment to remaining on the island at any cost. Alcatraz was only 16 of the 30 million surplus federal acres. When the Indians actually take possession, their land holdings still won't be as extensive as they were in the original treaties. So, because originally outlined in the treaties were 155 million acres approximately. And their land holdings now are only 50 million. The 30 million surplus acres are theirs, you know, because various forts and things that were established on the reservations and wartime military use diminished those lands. And there's been a lot of illegal sale of Indian lands. That's why Alcatraz, that's the Alcatraz idea. We're going to no longer compromise.
After Alcatraz, suddenly everyone was interested in Indians and their problems. But the Indians remembered the many years of slow, determined struggle by Indian groups all over the country to protect Indian rights and to build Indian unity. They knew that the Alcatraz idea was meaningless unless this unity and strength could be felt wherever Indian families were stubbornly holding on to what was left of their land and their way of life. The scene is repeated again and again. There is no longer room for compromise. It's a question of survival as Indians. And it's a question of survival as human beings, because the Indian sees the white man tampering with the forces of nature, moving mountains, rivers, destroying source of food and water. This is the Muckleshoot Indian Reservation on the White River. Last night they put nets in the river, and this morning they tried again, but there were no fish, and the Indian know why.
Then the fish got less. What's no more then? There used to be a lot of fish here long ago. You know, this regular, they're mountain fish. They go way up. See? They don't spawn here. They go way up in them little streams, way up in the mountains. See, and they built that dam. And then the fish got less, then there was no more.
Also, Mud Mountain Dam, when they let out water, they let out a great deal of what they call silt. We lost 35 to 400,000 fish when they were coming up to spawn because they know the fish can't breathe in silt. So they, totally destroyed that run. Well, matter of fact, we asked the federal government to plant fish for us, and they planted them, but we lost them because of inadequate system up on that diversion by Puget Power. We lost over 3,000 fingerlings there.
It's the inter-county flood control system. They push all this gravel back and forth and scrape all the hard pan off. And then when the river comes up, there's nothing but sand and gravel flowing, and it kills the fish right there.
And the land that borders the river line is slowly being beaten out of us by the white man because they are buying it out. Some of it we don't know if it's bought out, leased, or where the heirs are, how much money came from it. But that's our main interest here, is to find out for sure if it really was leased, if it was sold, or just what's happening.
This here is a diversion made by a landowner who has bought an Indian land, and before you divert any river, you have to have a permit from the state. We asked the state prosecutor to bring necessary legal action to put the stream back in its original form, since where he diverted this river there's a spawning stream, and this has been totally destroyed. Right here we have a dying river. It's a river that's slowly dying because of numerous factors. You find that we have several polluters, industrial polluters, trying to hide what they're putting in the river. The tribe at this time has gotten an attorney, and we're beginning to institute legal actions to protect the river, our resource.